Woodcraft, helping you make woodwork.
Hello everybody, I'm Marcy, and we're going to talk today about milk paint and distressing and that sort of thing, kind of an antiquing, give you that aged look. The best way to get an aged look is to use the paint closest to the era it came from. So this is why we use milk paint. Back in the day when paint was first found out about, it was a milk base or a milk paint, and the reason they call it milk paint is because it was made with milk. Milk was their binder, and most of it was milk and some minerals and some pigments, and they kept mixing it together and they came up with milk paint. So the milk paint that we have today in the brown bag that you mix is as close to the original milk paint as you'll find. We do carry a milk paint that is pre-mixed for you with a little bit of a clear coat in it as well. It has a little bit higher sheen. It works just the same. You just stir the can instead of mix it by hand. But this gives you a little bit duller, flatter look from back in the day than the can does. It'll be a little bit shinier. One thing about the milk paint that's really important is it's VOC compliant, which in the state of California they're really big on VOC compliant. It's all about the chemicals being released in the air, and this has no VOCs, completely free, so it's not toxic to you or anything, and it is a water base, so it cleans up with soap and water, which is really nice. A lot of people are a little bit feared of it, and it's a very simple, easy application. If you know how to paint, you can paint with milk paint very easily. What I want to do is I kind of want to just demonstrate to you how to mix it together and kind of how to use it. We're not going to do a whole lot of painting today. I brought a couple examples. This bench, if you can see it, it's got the old milk paint that would have, you know, what's left of it from back in the day. So that's the kind of look that you can get with the milk paint we use today. This piece here is just a cabinet with a clear coat finish on it, and with this milk paint you can go over the top of an existing finish. You don't necessarily have to sand it down or anything. You just have to use what they call a binder. Bonder. They call it a bonder, but it's a binder. It allows the paint to adhere to the surface rather than having just a natural wood surface. And with this you would mix 2 to 1, 2 parts paint, 1 part bonder, and you'd only use it on your first coat. Once that's dry, then you can go ahead and just use straight milk paint and it'll adhere to it, so you don't have to use that bonder every time, just one time with the bonder. Also, nice thing about this is you can mix what you're going to use. You don't have to mix the whole bag. It's got a very long shelf life, so if you see, I just curl mine up and put a little clip on the end, and it stays and it'll be good forever. You just add water to it. So that's why these are up here, just a couple examples. I don't want to paint on this one, so I'm just going to get rid of it because I'm kind of messy. I'm not the cleanest painter out there. That bonder is over existing paint also? Yes. Any kind of finish. Any finish. You don't necessarily have to scuff it. You know, you do have to clean it. Something that doesn't leave a soap residue behind. I like straight water and steel wool. I'm big on that. I clean almost everything with just straight water and steel wool and dry it off and let it dry. So you can scuff it with 220 or 320 if you like. Feel like you get a little extra bonding. It's not going to hurt anything. So, any questions so far? It's going to be real thin, right? This paint is very thin. It's very thin to begin with. So when you add the bonder, you just add a little bit more pigment to adjust. It's not an exact science. So they say 2 to 1, 2 parts paint already mixed, 1 part bonder. Your paint is 1 to 1 ratio, which is 1 part water, cup of paint. Obviously that's a large quantity. If you're doing a small job like this, I would use maybe 2 tablespoons of water and 2 tablespoons of powder and mix them together. And then when you do mix it together, which we're gonna do so you can see the consistency, because I think that's the most important part to the milk paint is consistency. It's very thin. And a lot of people look at it and think, oh, this is just way too thin. But it's very much like an oil-based feel. It's very thin. It's not like latex. It's not thick at all. And the more you add pigment to it, the more it's going to fall out and not do its job. So you want to be real close to keeping that ratio of 1 to 1. So I have about this much black pigment in, so I'm going to do the wander thing here and show you what this pigment looks like. It's very light and fluffy. And I put it in the cup before y'all arrived because I generally get it all over my face and everything else. I am not clean with it at all. So this will just give you an idea. It's very airborne. Once it gets in the air, it'll go everywhere.
What is the pigment?
Black. It's pigment. It consists, I have a little history in paint world too, so I can actually answer this. Pigment consists of a lot of calcium to very little color, and they dry it and make it a powder form. Calcium is a powder to begin, calcium carbonate. It is a powder to begin with, but they generally use a liquid color and then mix it together, let it dry, get it powdery like this. So when it hits the air, it's really light and fluffy and it'll go everywhere. That's the calcium carbonate that floats everywhere. So you can use anything you want to stir it with. I have this cute little whisk that works really well. Everything cleans up with water, so you can use whatever you want. I wouldn't recommend any electric devices because you're just going to create air and foam on the top, which it always has a bit of a foam on top, and you just kind of push it aside. But if you use an electric mixer, you know, like an old bacon mixer, it will get very, very foamy and a lot of air in it, and it won't be as efficient. So definitely stir it by hand. So you saw about how much pigment I have, and I'm going to use, you know, about the same amount of water. Again, it's not an exact science. You don't have to get a measuring cup out and be exact. So I'm just going to add them together. And if I get black on my face, somebody please tell me and not let me get through this with black all over me. This would be one of those moments where it'd be nice to see inside the cup with a camera behind it. A lot of times, if you read the literature that I gave you, they'll, which I don't like the word that they use, but they compare it to pancakes batter. And I'm not really big on that because it's not lumpy and thick. It's very runny, and it creates a bit of a foam on top. And if you mix too much, you put air in it, and it just becomes foamy. And it's hard to get a nice, even, smooth brush stroke with it. So this is about where we're at here. I mean, it is runny. If it was thick, you would see it come up off the thing, but it is fairly runny. A little bit better than water, but not pancake by any means. I don't say that word well, so don't laugh at me. That's my mother's fault from when I was a child. Yeah, I am. I blame everything on her. Yep. Throw mom under the bus. Can you see it? I don't want to spill it on anybody. I've been known to do that too. Okay, probably the most important part to this paint, which they don't talk about a lot in any of the literature that I've read, just through my experience using it and my experience in the paint world, The pigment is very heavy, and it's a lot heavier than water. So if you let it sit for too long, it starts to settle out, and then the water's on top, the pigment's on the bottom, and you're brushing on colored water. So while you're using this, especially if it's a big job, every 5 minutes or so, just give it another stir and make sure that you get, you know, all of that pigment stay within and not fall out. You'll know if it fell out. There'll be a big thick spot on the bottom. And all you got to do is just re-stir it. This will last a couple weeks in a closed container. You just stir it again when you go to use it again. But I would make a habit of, you know, stirring it very frequently to keep it mixed well. The initial mixing, you're going to want to let it sit for half hour or so. We're not going to today, obviously, we're going to move along. But what happens is you need that pigment to get moist, and it takes a while sometimes for all of the pigment to be moist. And if it doesn't become moist, then it sits on top of your project and creates a bump, which is no big deal. You can just sand it off and your next coat will take care of it. But it is recommended that you let it sit for about a half an hour and let it really absorb into the pigment, and then stir it again before you move on. I'm not going to do that, but that's the recommendation, and it's a good recommendation. I agree with it wholeheartedly. So it's just like anything else. Now that we're to the point where we're mixed up and we're going on pretty much a raw wood finish here, so we don't need to put a binder in. Typically you would have this sanded, obviously, in a little bit nicer smoothness to get a good finish out of it. But I'm going to strip it all down and do it anyway, so we're just going to go right over the top. And this is very much just like painting with anything else. It's all about going with the grain and just moving along, not too rapidly but not too slow either. And you'll see, I don't know if you can see how foamy it gets, but you just keep working that foam around until it's just flat like you would any normal paint. When it comes to the application, it dries fast, which is a little bit different from oil-based and latex. It dries extremely fast, but in between coats you're going to want to give it a couple of hours before you sand on it. You're going to want to do 220 or 320 in between each coat. You don't necessarily need 2 coats. That's all about you guys. This is as much of an artistic thing as it is anything else. The thinner your coats, the faster it dries, the faster it shrinks. So shrinking will create cracks. So if you don't want any cracks, then use a heavier coat the first time out. If you think you got it too heavy, you can sand that down in between the coats, and you can get the look that you're looking for without having to start over. That's the beauty of it. There's no perfect solution here. It's all about the person doing the job and what they're looking for. Question?
I'll ask you.
Okay. Is there any questions since we're at that point?
Well,
Okay, cool.
can you mix, once you've got that mixed up, can you mix it with the stuff that's already in the can?
I wouldn't.
You would, okay.
No. That's got more chemicals in it. This only has 4 or 5 ingredients. And that's... The question is, can I mix